We are at our last panel of the day. I'm Réka, Szemerkényi, the Executive Vice President of CEPA, and I'm very honored to be here together with colleagues and friends, if I may say, from the region and from the US. This is a very special discussion for us for several reasons. First, of course, this is the last panel of the day, which is usually the one that shows at every conference, who is the hardcore, who are the really committed people. So that alone is, a system of a filter, yeah. And secondly, we're discussing a topic that is really has been in the forefront of many CEPA events before and many research discussions before, because we have seen the pressures that come that is expressed on sovereignty from energy and supply security in Central East Europe. We have been discussing this, but much has been done since these discussions that we really started probably after 2005, the first major crisis. Really much has been done, and we have to appreciate that. Many of the key natural gas interconnector projects have been accomplished in the Central European region, and some really strategic access points to the world markets have been built up, such as the Lithuanian and the Polish LNG terminals. They couldn't be more welcome in our efforts to diversify our import sources. In addition, what we can see is that developments in the global gas market, primarily the emergence of the United States on the non-conventional gas market as a major energy exporter, has shifted some of the foundational paradigms of the global energy market in these decades, decade and a half also. All of these have a very profound impact on the global energy market, and this is all making natural gas more and more a commodity. So much so that some could even question why energy security is still a topic of a security policy discussion like ours. But could we really ask that question? There is the potential of a new development on the European natural gas market that can render the previous positive steps to be of minor relevance. Is it possible that we shall have to call the year of 2018 or 2019 the year of when we lost it? Is it possible that this is going to be the year or the time when we actually lose momentum and all of the previous gains and successes can be sort of put on shelf and become of a lesser relevance for our strategic stability and independence in the long term that we would like to achieve? So it's so difficult to see that just when the countries of the region start to get their act together, invest in their own natural gas infrastructure, just when the European Union has proven its ability to think big and develop the outlines of the Strategic Energy Union and starts to use it or gives birth to this document that could be used as a leading document. And just when the United States starts to play a major role on the LNG global scene, we see something strange happening. We're faced with a situation when there's this turn can really make an impact on the well-functioning energy market in Europe partial, or keep it partially market type for the long term. Because there's a project that is surfacing with a surprisingly serious political support from Europe, meaning nations, as well as the European Union to some extent, which has the potential of derailing all of this. What we have seen from 1990 to our very days is a series of severe manipulative actions of external political actors, Russia, that toyed with exerting influence on the European Union countries. But so far, most of these previous efforts to exert political pressure through the use of natural gas or energy in general has had a tangential impact, if I may say, or we can call them tactical energy security pressures. But now the situation with Nord Stream 2 is totally different. The consequences and the impact of Nord Stream 2 and this project is such that it is not going to exert a tactical pressure point for Europe. It has the potential of exerting a strategic energy security pressure for the whole of the continent, fundamentally derailing all of the previous efforts. I'd like to be bragging about our new report. We are honored to have the author of it here. We have just published Europe and Nord Stream Myths, Reality, and the Way Forward. This is a publication and a research that is based on, and I'm very happy to have Margarita Sanova here. Thank you so much for working on this fantastic report. This really helps us to see through the numbers, the figures, the reality on the ground, whether those sort of messages or those communication tools that we see on the European scene about Nord Stream 2 are true or not. And what we can see is really that the facts prove very strongly that Nord Stream 2 is not a business project and that it is not going to enhance European consumers' security or even economic welfare. Yet it's on, and some say that it's over. The decision has practically made done, and the whole process is practically underway, although without an European Union-wide consensus on this. This is why we believe that our discussion today has this very special strategic relevance, and we're very honored and pleased to have a wonderful list of speakers with us this afternoon. You have seen their bios. It's in the document that you have in the folders, and many of you, I'm sure, know many of our speakers personally as well. But let me just summarize briefly who we have in our discussion. First, to my left, I'm very honored to have Minister Piotr Naimski, Secretary of State for Strategic Energy Infrastructure in the Chancellery of the Prime Minister of Poland, and an old friend of CEPA, if I may say, and my own personal old friend as well. We have worked on energy security issues for, well, 25 years or so together, and I'm very much appreciating your presence here. You served in the energy security team in the President as advisor to the head of the National Security Bureau before. As Deputy Minister of the Economy, you were a National Security Advisor in the Office of the Prime Minister Buzek between 1999 and 2001. All of these years working incredibly hard on the energy diversification, natural gas import diversification for Poland. With this incredible knowledge and experience in energy security, I'm just throwing out a few questions as I introduce all of our speakers, and I hope that we will be able to find answers to them at the end of our discussion. There are a lot of people following our discussion live stream today. The last figure I had was over 320 or 30 or so. I'm very pleased and very happy to have them with us. I'm sure that many of them have a question in their mind that range from one end, what is the European Union going to look like once Nord Stream 2 is built? And does it matter? Is it a real problem? And the other end, is it not too late already? Has it not been decided really? Is there a way to stop it? What has to be done? What is the action plan to do about Nord Stream 2? Next to him, we're very honored to have Deputy Assistant Secretary Sandra Oudkirk from the Bureau of Energy Resources of the State Department. I'm also very honored to have been on the same panel and have as a friend and also a strong friend of CEPA. Sandra Oudkirk, a career member in the Senior Foreign Service, joined the State Department in 1991, just when I joined. A seasoned diplomat with a very impressive career behind, and joined the Energy Bureau in January 2018, and has an incredible and invaluable insight into the into European energy policy developments from from the Washington perspective. You have a tough job, Sandra. You must be hearing criticism from two angles by the Europeans. One is that the United States is not active enough and sees the challenge as a European problem to be solved by the Europeans. And the other is that the US is way too active and should stay out of it and let it for the Europeans to decide. So we're very excited to have your insight and have a view of what is the action plan seen from Washington, what can be done and what should be done to tackle the Nord Stream 2 challenge. For our third, to my left, speaker, we are very pleased to have a new friend of CEPA with us, Dominic Tolksdorf, Program Director of Foreign and Security Policy of the Heinrich Böll Foundation in North America since 2016. Prior to this, Dominic worked at think tanks in Munich, Germany, Brussels, at IFRI, in Paris, focusing on EU foreign policy, Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and transatlantic relations. Dominic is not an energy expert, but he's an expert and has an invaluable insight into Germany and German political discussions. what we very much believe is that this issue, the decision on Nord Stream 2, obviously cannot be discussed without really understanding what is the thinking about this in Germany. Why is it that there is so much support towards Nord Stream 2? And is it true that Germany has, as a bulk, started to support the Nord Stream 2 project? And if not, there are people who are concerned about Nord Stream 2 who are our potential allies and friends in this effort to have an impact on the decision. And last, but definitely not least, we're very, very honored to have Minister Žygimantas Vaičiūnas, Minister of Energy from Lithuania. Minister Vaičiūnas has worked on energy security for over a decade now, actively supporting his country's energy import diversification priority as energy representative of Lithuania to the EU and as advisor to the minister and vice minister, leading up to the construction of this most important project that has a whole range of consequences, the floating LNG terminal, and also on the electricity interconnection with Sweden and Poland. All of these experiences have a lot of consequences and lessons to learn and to be aware of. Minister, we would be very honored to have your insight into what it means when a country completes a major infrastructure project that cuts it off or that helps it diversify away from a single supplier. How does it impact on your relations with the previous sole supplier, Russia? How does it impact on prices? How does it impact on the national market and the consumers from a consumer's perspective? Is this project not costly enough? If this is built, why is Lithuania onto new project of electricity interconnectivity and green energy after this project has been completed? So with this, I would like to shuffle a little bit around our speakers and turn to Sandra, if I may, as our first presenter.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much. Thank all of you for staying here through what has been a very interesting, but I imagine a rather long day, and also for the organizers for inviting me to speak today. I think one of the things that you asked is, does energy security really matter? And the US perspective is that energy security really does matter. Energy security is where national security intersects with technology and innovation and change, and the business community. And for that reason, there are a whole lot of trends that we're seeing emerge in this century that are changing the way we interact. These changes include the rapid advent of LNG and the changes it's bringing to gas markets, making regional markets more global, changes to renewable and energy efficiency technologies that are making them price competitive in the electric power system with traditional entrants into the grid, financing innovation that's making investment in these new technologies possible, and the falling cost of production for a lot of the inputs that are crucial to the new energy ecosystem. And these are all areas where the United States has cooperated and hopes to cooperate more with our European partners. And because we see European energy security as a long-standing strategic priority, not just for Europe, but for the United States. And so moving forward, I think we hope to be vigilant. We hope to build on the successes that have already occurred, the real significant changes in terms of the advent of interconnectivity and market-based disciplines in Europe. But we look at Europe and we see that although overall, on average, it's a market-based system with a lot of competition, there's still islands of vulnerability. Europe relies on Russian pipeline gas for about 35% of its gas. And that doesn't seem like a terribly large amount. It's natural. Russia's right next door. They're a massive producer and exporter of gas. But there are almost a dozen countries in Europe that rely on Russia for 75% or more of their gas, and a few countries that rely on Russia for all of their gas. And that creates dependency and vulnerability. And those are the vulnerabilities that the energy security discussion seeks to focus on. Because a lot of the countries that are in this vulnerable situation view this vulnerability not just as a commercial or an economic issue. They're vulnerable to having to take a price, whatever price that the monopoly provider offers, but it's also a strategic and a security vulnerability. And so when the United States looks at the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, looks at multiple lines of the Turk Stream pipeline, our opposition is rooted in the fact that these pipelines will build in infrastructure vulnerability for a generation to come. It's a 30-year investment in infrastructure that will take the existing level of vulnerability and cement it in place, literally using cement. And I think I'd like to quote something that was in the joint statement that the President and President Duda of Poland released just a week ago. And in that statement, we committed to continue to coordinate our efforts to counter energy projects that threaten our mutual security, such as Nord Stream 2. So I think that's a very clear recent statement from the White House on White House policy towards that pipeline and to other pipelines that pose this sort of threat to the increasing diversification that we're seeing in Europe. And so the question I get asked a lot is, well, it's great that the United States is opposed. You've stated your policy very clearly. Everyone knows what it is. But what can be done? How do we change this? And I think the way to change this is to support the European Union and the European Energy Union, the Third Energy Package, the variety of projects of common interest out there that are designed to increase interconnectivity, to provide diversification, to reach into those landlocked countries that are on the end of a spoke in a hub and spoke system. And I'll list a few of them. The Baltic pipe that will connect Norway to Poland, the gas interconnector between Poland and Lithuania, the Kirk Island LNG terminal. You mentioned LNG terminals earlier. The interconnector between Greece and Bulgaria that could bring Caspian gas up into Central Europe. The MidCat pipeline, which we never talk about in Central Europe events, but that will take the energy island that is the Iberian Peninsula and connect it to the rest of Europe. And I think all of these projects are projects that will help move forward a process that Europe has already begun. And so in conclusion, I think that we, the United States government, view energy and energy security as a unique situation in foreign policy, because it's one where you really can derive a win-win situation, a situation where business and industry and academia and politics can work together to take a disparate set of inputs and make a better whole. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It leads to a number of questions which we will wait for until we finish with the round of speakers, but it was very insightful, very fascinating. Can I ask the Minister Vaitiūnas to follow up with his comments?
Okay.
And
thank you very much. It is really a pleasure to be here. And once again, congratulations for CEPA for 10 years anniversary of doing a very important job on action here in Central and Eastern European markets. And of course, this is the things which we have to discuss from time to time, not only discuss, but also to act. So this is a good opportunity. And referring to the questions before, I totally agree with the key principle that we are talking about the infrastructure, which is tightening the markets for the long term. So that's why this is very important to talk about all the technical possibilities what we have. We have all the possibilities to have flexible solutions like LNG terminals. And in Lithuanian case, it was really a good example that before the introduction of the terminal, we had the highest prices in the world for the gas. It was in 2012. Even the higher price than Japanese were paying after the Fukushima. So we learned the lesson that we have to have the alternative infrastructure, and it was really a national decision to build this LNG terminal. It diversified our supply, and now we have currently about 50% going through LNG terminal and 50% going through the pipeline. So the competition is working. we have competitive gas supply, and the prices decreased from 25 to 35%. And import price decreased by 50%. So it is really an important instrument in our markets. And it was really important not only on national scale, but also for the regional scale, because we implemented interconnectors between the Baltic states. And this was the instrument to bring the price cap for all the region, for gas price cap for all the region. And now we are moving forward because now we have real plans to implement other interconnectors. I really appreciated this year that we had the success of signing the final investment decision together with Poland and making the GIPL, so-called GIPL interconnector, Lithuanian-Poland interconnector, to be implemented soon. So at the end of 2021, we will have this interconnector, as well as another interconnector. This is between Estonia and Finland, which will be finalized at the end of 2020. So it means that we will have all the functioning markets and infrastructure is there. The question what we have, of course, is always that these projects were initiated and were decided on the national scale. Of course, to some extent, it was supported by the European Union. But now we have the challenge for the future, because this is the question about the competitive gas supply. And we see the developments here in the US about the additional capacities of the LNG, which will be supplied in the market in the coming years. From the current capacities, it could increase by 5 times. And the question is very simple, that we are talking about the European Union market capacity, about the demand in the European Union, and having in mind the decreasing internal production, especially in the Northern Sea, especially in the Netherlands, we have spare capacities to be exported from the US. And here, of course, this is the key question that we have about, at the same time, we have the increased numbers from the Russian gas export. And here, this year is the top record year for the Gazprom of export of the gas to Europe. And now we are talking about the quite important political momentum that we can enhance US and European Union energy cooperation, and LNG could be one of the key things to develop. But here, of course, the challenge and the fact is that Russia is competing very successfully. So the Nord Stream 2 is, of course, very natural for them to have to tighten the markets and to have bigger capacities here in European Union. And here, of course, when we are looking to the statistics, it's about 7 trillion cubic feet are already this year will be exported from Russia to European Union. In the future, we see that about more than 11 trillion cubic feet will be open for competition. And the same amount will be there here in the US, the same export capacity. So this is really for us to think about all the instruments to create for the future. And always, this is a question about not only the geostrategic nature, but also the economic benefits. So just look at the numbers, what we have now in the markets. This is about 300 billion US dollars is spent every year for the European Union energy bill. And 100 of this, so 1/3, is going to Russia. The question is very simple. How much of this amount could be attracted to the other markets to compensate the current US and European Union trade deficit, which is equals to 150 billion dollars. So this is the capacities which we can use for the future, which we can ensure with the strategic moves right now. And the question is really important. Momentum is very important for the future. So here, of course, what is very important also for our regional market, we are talking about the possibilities. We have enough of the infrastructure, just we have to create the functioning markets. The markets which will be attractive for the US gas supply. And currently, this is not the case, because from all the US LNG export, only 7% is going to the European Union. Of course, last year was symbolically very important, both for Poland and for Lithuania, because it was the first LNG cargoes were coming from the US, from the terminals here. But this was just an exception, but not a trend. And here, of course, we have a challenge that this year, of course, we have a diminishing LNG from the US, and that's the lesson which we have to learn and look to the future, what we can do to ensure that bigger numbers of LNG cargoes could be supplied to European Union and to our region. And that's the way that we are talking about the flexibility, meaning that all the infrastructure which we have, I mean LNG terminals, it's enough of the flexible to create the markets. And that's looking from the consumer's perspective. Even, for example, LNG terminals pays back, because in Lithuanian case, every year we are paying for this FSRU, for floating supply and regasification unit. Every year, just for the operational cost, we are paying about 100 million euros. But even with those numbers, this terminal pays back. So this is also the answer that this infrastructure is really competitive. But to some extent, we have to ensure the strategic future for the years to come. And here, of course, to sum up, the question is about the competition, and we learned our lesson that we being dependent on one pipeline, one supplier, and one price, one political price, is too dangerous. And it was like Iron Curtain at these years, because it was no other solutions. But now we survived. We have these technical possibilities for diversification. And this is our very clear answer, that this terminal was really a success story for us, for Lithuania, for our region. The markets are increasing. We will have more infrastructure to be built in the coming years. So this is also an attractive opportunity for the US LNG to be in our market. Another question, of course, it's about the electricity links, which we implemented also in the coming years. From 2015, we have interconnectors with Poland, with Sweden. And last week, we made a very important decision together with, and we appreciate really the Poland support on this question about the synchronization of the Baltic states networks with the European Union one. So this was a decision for which we are going about 10 years. And we have now the application for the European Union so-called NSOE, Transmission System Operators Network. And this will solve our dependency on the electricity system, being dependent till now on Russian and Belarusian networks. So this decision will change our future in the coming years. And this is the way how we are diversifying not only the supply, but also ensuring the system security. That's equally important. The key challenge for our region is still Ostrovets nuclear power plant, which is just at the 40 kilometers from the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius. This nuclear power plant is being built in violation with all the international nuclear safety and environmental standards. And here, of course, we're also asking not only US presence on the LNG market, but also more local support on this project, that all the safety should be ensured, and international supervision of this project should be made possible. European Commission made their move. They ensured that the stress test for this project should be completed. So the first exercise was made, but now we have to implement, they have to implement all the recommendations. Very serious 24 recommendations on seismic situation and so on. So this is the question not only for the region, not only for the European Union, but also this is global question where we are looking forward to have more vocal US presence. So this is shortly about the key developments, but to sum up, we really need flexible solutions and creative approach on these LNG developments.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Minister. And if I may turn now to the Minister Naimski, Piotr, if I can ask for a Polish experience and a Polish action plan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting. It's my really pleasure to take part. First, I would like to say that I agree 100% with what Mrs. Oudkirk said. This is, the outline concerning security of energy supplies as we understand it in Poland. Competition and in this area and the necessity to secure energy supplies as the major component of this security of the country is nothing new. We had such a situation 100 years ago. Only raw materials changed. So we are not competing about coal these days, and even not about crude oil. Sometimes we do. But there is a competition about gas supplies and probably technologies for renewables. And if we are talking about gas supplies and the competition in this area, we have to remember what the Russian doctrine is on that. This is famous, sometimes forgotten, Kwieciński's Falin doctrine, published probably 28 years ago, something like that. And the major idea was that Soviet Union, still existing at that time, final stage, decided to replace tanks with pipelines. And this strategy goes on. And if we are talking about Nord Stream, we are not talking about gas. We are not talking about gas itself. We are or exclusively about gas. We are talking about the tool, political tool, which Russians, they would like really to keep inside European structure. And this is not accidental that the major target for the tool, they are post-communist new democracies in Europe, means Central European states. And Nord Stream, second Nord Stream, is going to deliver 55 BCM. Actually, in Lithuania, they are closer to United States because they are counting feet. We are still counting in meters. So, so you see, this 55 BCMs of gas is being directed toward Czech Republic, Austria, and Balkan states. And those states' demand for gas are on a not very high level. Every of those countries needs, several BCMs of gas yearly, and these 50 yearly will completely saturate the market down south from Poland in Europe, which means that those countries will be really losing in practice possibility of diversification of supplies. So they will stay dependent, as you said before, for 30 years probably. What is the solution? You see, we are discussing many times series of conferences and political discussions how to act against Nord Stream. Okay, we shouldn't we should widen the area, the perspective. We shouldn't stress only about Nord Stream. If we are talking about political level, we should discuss how we would like to deter Russian offensive in Europe. This is first. If we are talking about energy supplies, we should think about our own projects, offensive projects. We should proceed in Poland with building Baltic pipe, connection with what we are doing, connection with Norwegian shelf through Denmark under Baltic Sea to Poland. We are stressing other parts of this project. We are building interconnectors to the neighbors, just enabling them to rely not only on this Gazprom domination or dominated deliveries, but to have an access to the open market, to the world. And this is what we really should stress, and this is what we should do. Nord Stream is not only about, about external politics or relations between certain countries or even European Union and Russia or United States and Russia. It's about our internal conditions. It's about relations between European states. It's about solidarity between European states. You asked us what will be the result of completed Nord Stream for European Union. It will be simply loss of trust. It will show to the Europeans that European regulations, European treaties, European solidarity is for chosen, not for everybody. It's for those who are simply bigger and more powerful. And for the rest of the member states, it will be the disastrous result. And it's also about, the relations between United States and Europe, because safe Europe is question of US safety. If Europe is endangered, United States are in troubles. It was always like that. When European states got into troubles, United States were pressed to intervene. Last time in '95. Sometimes we don't remember Balkan Wars. Europeans were not able to solve the problem. So the dispute between Washington and Berlin over the Nord Stream, this pipeline, this investment, is not only a dispute over this specific relation, one could say economic relation between Russia and Germany. It's a dispute about relations between United States and Germany, United States and European Union, United States and allies among NATO alliance. Because we are on a verge of starting to discuss this issue on a NATO level, and it would be disastrous. We shouldn't permit do it, because we need cohesive NATO alliance. And this will divide not only European Union, this will divide NATO as well. So to solve this issue, to solve this problem, we should make one step aside, just, to discuss the general strategy for Western Hemisphere, for the West. because, you know, so far we are disrupting Western alliance. Western alliance, which was built after the Second World War, which was based on certain international or multilateral agreements, and those structures, very often, they don't work anymore. So we should probably think about renewing some probably agreements. We could think about, probably certain agreement on energy security, because this is a very important issue. We agree on that. So probably it needs special treatment. It was such a project 12 years ago, born in Warsaw, European treaty, we called it, and it was proposed to all NATO members, United States as well. It wasn't a good time for it. Right timing is probably coming soon. We can think once again about this agreement. You know, making LNG commodity makes another possibility, because we can use LNG as the mean for deliveries just in case of crisis. The only thing is to make LNG terminals available and transmission grids connected to those terminals in whole Europe, not only in Poland and Lithuania. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Absolutely thought-provoking. It's a fantastic lead. And then we have Dominik Tolstorff to close this round of presentations.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about the discussions on Nord Stream 2 in Germany, and also point out that it's also a controversial topic in Germany that also divides political parties in Germany, and it also comes at high political costs for Germany in the end. As you all know, the German government has for a long time argued that the project is a commercial project instead of a political project. And from an economic perspective, the project seems to be also promising. First of all, natural gas from Russia is likely to remain cheaper in the future than LNG, for example. And even if the prices for LNG will drop in the next years, Gazprom can still adjust the prices here. The second thing is Germany would become the largest hub for natural gas to Europe, with around 70% of gas from Russia going through Germany. But nevertheless, I think that the German government underestimated the political costs that come with this project, and the sort of pushback, especially recently from the United States. And also Angela Merkel in April this year, for the first time, argued that, yeah, there are political dimensions that come with this project. Now the problem is the German government seems to be locked in this sort of project. The companies that are involved, of course, now want the political backing from the German government, yeah, it's sort of like locked in, and the sort of the pushback from the United States became very apparent last year with the sanctions law. Which infuriated many German politicians that regarded the sanctions law as a sort of interference of U.S. policies or U.S. Policies into German and European energy policies. And it was also, Germany was in the middle of a campaign to the German Bundestag, which was in September last year. And some German politicians used this as a sort of to take advantage of the topic to criticize this sort of America First strategy behind the sanctions law. But overall, Nord Stream 2 has been a controversial topic in Germany that has divided the political parties as well. And all parties have, or most parties have very prominent opponents also within their ranks. For example, if you look at Norbert Röttgen, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Bundestag, he's opposed to the project, or Manfred Weber, who's from the CSU and who might become the next European Commission president. If you look in the Bundestag, in the German parliament, you have certain fractions. You have a lot of support, of course, for the project among fractions that are sort of business-friendly. Other groups more come from the sort of argument we need to engage with Russia. Russia has always been a reliable energy partner for Germany. And the only party in Germany that really almost entirely opposes the Nord Stream 2 project is the German Green Party. And I just want to explain to you the reasons behind that opposition. And that's, first of all, from an energy perspective. There is the more natural gas to Germany and Europe also stands in contrast to Germany's goal to reduce its dependence on hydrocarbons, and also to reach the goals that Germany set for itself in the Paris Climate Agreement. Then there's an economic argument. There are economists that argue that the future demand of natural gas for Germany is much lower than predicted by those companies, for example, that are involved with Nord Stream 2, sorry, but also by the European reference scenario. So building a new pipeline would create sort of lock-in effects, meaning a sort of new pipeline is planned for 40 or 50 years. So once you have invested in that, you will also want to use it, of course, in the end. Another argument is the EU argument that has been mentioned here already quite often. The project stands in contrast to the EU goal to diversify its energy imports. For example, as mentioned, as outlined in the European Energy Union. And of course, there's the geopolitical argument that is also very strongly argued by politicians of the Green Party that say, of course, the new pipeline would give Russia too much leverage over European affairs. It undermines European solidarity with Ukraine, and in the end also undermines the credibility of the European sanctions against Russia. Of course, dialogue with Russia, everyone agrees dialogue with Russia is an important thing, but it doesn't need to be achieved by creating new and further energy dependence from Russia. So in the end, the Greens argue that instead of investing more in pipelines in Europe, you should rather invest in the extension of energy grids in Europe, interconnectors that have also been mentioned already, storage technologies, and energy efficiency, of course. One remark that I would like to make is I think that Germany in the whole process should have taken the concerns of its neighbors more into account. Despite all this tension that sometimes exists between, let's say, for example, right now with the German government and the Polish government, nevertheless, they are both partners within the European Union. And of course, in the end, you need to find compromises. And if Germany hasn't been willing to compromise on the question of energy issues, it's difficult to criticize other countries within the European Union why they don't cooperate on topics like migration. So I would argue that holding on to the project of Nord Stream 2 comes with high political costs that might have also severe consequences for European integration in the future. What sort of projects can you achieve if every member state always pushes on its own interests? But one last point on LNG, because that has been mentioned here and it's often discussed in this context. I'm very skeptical that even if the Nord Stream 2 project would fail, that LNG would be the solution for Germany. Now, after the meeting between President Trump and Jean-Claude Juncker and the statements, Germany tries to show some goodwill. Companies assess if it would make sense to build an LNG terminal in Germany. But in the end, it might be too expensive. And also from an ecological perspective, why would you invest in an LNG terminal that is also expensive to build, and creates again the same lock-in effects. So in the end, you can also just go with the pipeline from Russia. Yeah, the one last point on the sort of, again, the LNG. Lately, the sort of discussions, especially after Trump-Juncker meeting, there is, among many observers in Germany, the impression that, yeah, the sanctions law from last year was not only to punish Russia and those companies that are involved with the pipeline, but also to sort of promote U.S. economic interests. And I would say this is a dangerous trend because it further diminishes transatlantic unity on Russia policies. The sanctions that we have in place right now might not be very effective, but they are very symbolic. And by diverging on sanctions, in the end, this is like the last real project that the Americans and the Europeans have in common right now when it comes to international affairs. So you have to be also sort of careful that you don't risk the coordinated fashion in that project.
Thank you so much. Well, I have a lot of questions, but I would not like to abuse my position. I would propose that we immediately open the floor for the questions, because I'm sure there are a number of questions that popped up in your mind, and I would be very happy to first accommodate the questions. Can we start here, please? Yeah, we might need a mic here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words and ask a question. Maybe say a few words more of the question. My name is John Prunskis. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I'm also honorary consul of Lithuania. And fascinating presentation. I mean, you guys just had tremendous insights. Nord Stream 2 is one of the most significant projects, both from a United States perspective and a European perspective. I have an apartment in Vilnius. I have a home in the United States. One is 5 times smaller than the other. My gas bill was 10 times greater at the height of the embargo from Russia. And what the Baltic citizen, when he hears about Germany talking about an economic region, Germany has to understand that the Baltic citizen, when gas was the most expensive in the world, their whole entire paycheck went to pay their gas bill from end of November to May, their whole paycheck. So when someone says there's an economic difficulty or an economic benefit to obtaining natural gas from Russia, that's not going to fly with anyone who had to live through those days. And as a United States citizen, as we contribute to NATO, and we see that Russia's funding is coming from Nord Stream 2, it absolutely makes no sense to the average American. So I just wanted to thank the speakers for a fantastic presentation and then give you at least a little bit of perspective I have because I have a foot not only in the United States but also in the Baltic states. And I would urge and maybe ask, what is the number 1 or number 2 things that could be done to provide the energy that Germany and the rest of the European Union is requesting or needing, while at the same time stopping Nord Stream 2.
Thank you. I think it was more of a comment, really. And there was a question as well. Okay, let me collect one more question from that part of the floor and then respond to the 2.
The question is twofold. First, what do you think about the Russian propaganda that Europe is facing a gas supply gap, and this gas supply gap should be filled by Russia and nobody else? What are the alternatives? Secondly, looking at Nord Stream 2 in combination with Turkish Stream that is in the process of being built very soon, half of it is built already, we can see the Central Europe and Eastern Europe are encircled by Russian pipelines. So what is the alternative, and does, the question is to Sandra Oudkirk, what is the State Department doing in order to support more gas coming through the southern gas corridor in the future, particularly following the legal agreement on the Caspian Sea and the prospect that we may have Turkmen gas available to Europe as one of the alternatives to a European gas supply. And last thing about sanctions, I just want to throw in a question and some thinking that I've had about it. Talking about sanctions, I think that the European Union should follow its own policy on sanctions. The German companies, and they're not only German companies, there are 200 companies from 17 countries that are cooperating with Gazprom on Nord Stream 2. They have current contracts with Gazprom for the building of the pipeline. They're going to work together with two individuals who are on the sanctions list. Gennady Timchenko on the Russian side and Rothenberg, the Bank of Rothenberg, also on the sanctions list. Why doesn't the European Union implement its rule to forbid their own companies, European companies, to cooperate and to work together with companies that are already sanctioned by both the European Union and the United States? And that goes for the United States too. It's a very easy decision by Treasury Department. They threatened this when Bulgaria was building South Stream and signed contract with Timchenko. They said, okay, you are going to be sanctioned because every Bulgarian company that works with Timchenko is subject to sanctions. Why don't we apply the same rule now?
Great ones. Can I open this to answering? Sandra?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the question about the Southern Gas Corridor. I mean, the United States government has been extremely supportive of the Southern Gas Corridor since it first became, from its inception. And I will note that we support this project even though there are no U.S. investors in the project. There are U.S. companies that are providing goods and services and other support, but the direct financial impact for the U.S. is pretty attenuated. And we support it because it's a major way to diversify both sources of supply in Europe, but also markets for the Caspian. And so it's very much a win sort of all along the corridor. And I think that obviously it's a project that's scalable. The throughput can be doubled with a fairly light additional investment, and we're very supportive of that all along. We're also very supportive of other diversification means, and this goes to the question of where else could the gas come from? Inside Europe, there are other places like Romania and Cyprus, where there's a very good possibility of finding reasonable amounts of new gas. And we support the exploitation of those fields. We think that countries ought to be able to, produce their domestic resources. In a lot of cases, it involves, a new legal authority or some type of legislation through parliaments, and we're hopeful that that work will be done. But I think the key thing for the Southern Gas Corridor, and really also for potential Romanian offshore gas, is getting those interconnectors built. Because and for Southern Gas Corridor, a lot of it is the interconnector from Greece to Bulgaria. Greece has one LNG import terminal in place, another couple permitted. It really could be a Mediterranean input for Southern and Central Europe, but without the pipeline, without the interconnector, it won't go north.
Thank you. Anyone would like to respond to the other question? Minister, maybe?
Yes,
yeah.
Maybe shortly, just concerning this the situation now on this Nord Stream 2 and the question on the rationale of this project. So really this is the case that now we are letting to create the instrument which in the future could blackmail us. And this is always the question that we learned this lesson, that when Russia has the instrument, they will use it sooner or later, directly or indirectly, and that is for sure. So that's when we are talking about this Nord Stream 2 question and about this supply gap, which is made for the propaganda reasons. I also looking forward to have the statistics and the forecast from the International Energy Agency, which is saying very clearly that in 2030, it will be about, in global gas market, about 60% will be traded in the LNG form, and only 40% will be in the pipeline. So that's the key question. What is the difference of the methodology? But I trust International Energy Agency forecasts, and this is the way that we are talking about the gas as a commodity. And this is the difference. In case we are tightening this infrastructure, then it cannot be treated as a commodity, because commodity is letting all the instruments like LNG and so on to be functioning. So that's a key difference. But when we are talking about the geopolitical issues and problems, we have to admit that even now this project has not been built, but even now this divides Europe. So what will be afterwards?
Dominic, do you want
yeah,
to
I can. I mean, I think there's still the question. First of all, like the sort of energy question on. I mean, from the green perspective, it's of course invest more in renewable energies. There's still a lot of potential, and as I already pointed out, invest in interconnectors, storage technologies, etc. But of course, there is. It seems like LNG seems to be the big new thing. And it seems to be a flexible tool, and of course it's also understandable that countries in Eastern Europe want to have quick solutions for this in not too far future. Maybe one thing, but this is only a guess from the you said like sanctions list. It's maybe also easier from an American perspective to put business people from Russia on sanctions list. But in Europe, of course, you still have the strong economic links. So you would endanger a lot of other projects that are already for many years in operation. So I guess it would be also more complicated. But this is only my guess.
But these people are already on sanctions because of Ukraine, and they're building Nord Stream. They're building Nord Stream on the Russian side. Yeah. They're already sanctioned for Ukraine.
Do you want to further?
See,
Piotr? Yeah.
I do remember 14 years ago, I met for the first time Matthew Bryza at State Department, and he shown me the map with this southern gas corridor. So after 14 years, we still have to complete this section on Italian onshore portion, just to have this probably 5 BCM, 8 BCM possibility to be transported from Caspian to, listen to me, to Switzerland, because Switzerland was the first place where the idea was born. Switzerland wanted diversification. But you see, one have to look at the map of Georgia. All those pipelines from Caspian, they are crossing Georgia. This is just few kilometers from southern Ossetia. This is not safe. We have more safe sources of natural gas and crude oil for Europe. We have sources in States, we have sources on Mediterranean, we have sources somewhere also in other places. If we are going to really complete, this strategy of security of supplies for Europe, we should rely on secure sources, which is Norwegian Shelf, which is America, which is once again Mediterranean, which is probably other places where we can produce LNG.
Absolutely. Maybe we can take one, well, there are two questions. I see one here and one there as a second round. I'm trying to make sure that I catch the eyes of people who are interested.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Victor Rudd. I head up the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Ukrainian American Bar Association. I practiced international antitrust and cartel law for 35 years. My question to anybody on the panel who wants to address it is, we're all familiar with the concept of a monopoly, and typically that's in the context of a supplier, a seller. That's all over the map on the NS2 discussion. My question is, to what extent, if any, and I think I know the answer, but I'll ask the question anyway, to what extent has there been any consideration, any discussion whatsoever about the monopoly supply, or I should say the monopoly power of a customer? Okay, now technically Europe is not a monopoly customer, technically it's a monopolist, okay, but the idea is the same. You have customer or customers that Putin needs to get money at the opposite end of the pipeline. Has there been any discussion about that at all? And to what extent, at least in part, some of that supply-demand pressure can be reversed? Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe the last one we can...
Hello, my name is Vitaly. I'm from Ukraine. And just my organization is for almost like 4.5 years is trying to help Ukrainian army to fight Russian aggression and to survive. And you know, famous writer Clausewitz, who wrote probably the best book about war, he told that war is not an outstanding phenomenon, it's a continuation of politics in other means. So when you are talking about political price or political peace in a gas contract, I think that we Ukrainians, we know that we had like 10 years of gas wars with Russia, and that ended in Russian tanks. So we know that this political part, it can mean Russian tanks in the future, and you should think about that. My question is that you have two options. One option is to become an energy independent, and then you can, for example, stop importing Russian gas for 1 year, and that will work much more better than Javelin or anything to stop Russian propaganda, to stop Russian invasion in Ukraine, to stop everything. And you can also show weakness and build this Nord Stream 2 because economically it's more cheap for you. But how do you evaluate a price of this political part? How do you evaluate? Because if we stop transit of gas through Ukraine, it's definitely also a security issue because it makes Ukraine much more attractive for a full-scale Russian invasion. So please, how do you evaluate political and possibly security risks that this Nord Stream brings with it? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to take all these questions? Do you want to start? Minister Piotr, can I ask you? Maybe.
Hard to count political price. This is a question of sovereignty, security of our countries, and very often, by the end, this is countless. It's impossible to count it. Sometimes it's a 0-1 decision.
Yeah. Sandra?
I mean, I think one of the issues that I think that deserves a lot of future thought is coming up really with a common definition of what energy security means. Does it simply mean that there is fuel to heat homes and run vehicles and that energy's there? Or does it mean that consumers, whether those consumers are individual households or companies or utilities or governments, have the ability to choose who they purchase their energy from? I think we in the United States would argue that choice is important. It's more than just having fuel. It's having the fuel that suits you, and it's having the fuel at a fair price, or at a price that you find fair and reasonable. And I think when we look both at the question of the monopoly versus the monopsony and whether the consumer choice pushes back, and also the issue of the cost of energy independence versus the perceived cheapness or attractiveness of sort of building in dependency, that cuts to the core of really what we're talking about here. Energy security has a cost. And the country of Lithuania and the minister have very eloquently described how some countries have successfully dealt with paying that price. I think when we look at the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which has been a big subject here, the United States looks at it as an outsider. We look at the impact on Europe, which is a bad one. We look at the potential impact on Ukraine, which is a tragic one. And then we look at the impact, on the other end of the pipeline on Gazprom. It's a great impact on Gazprom. And so our geopolitical opposition to this pipeline stems from the fact that it is bad for Ukraine, extremely bad for Ukraine for many of the reasons that have just been enunciated here. And it doesn't help Europe achieve its Europe's self-articulated goals. And you mentioned at the beginning that the United States is criticized for, on the one hand, saying too much, on the other hand, saying too little. I guess that means we've reached an equilibrium or a balance of some sort. But as an outsider, but as a friend to Europe and to Ukraine, it really is incumbent on us to articulate these arguments because we are a step outside. And so when we state the opposition that we have at the very highest levels of government, that's where it's coming from. And a couple of people have said, that this is the last thing holding the United States and Europe together. I don't think that's true. Fundamentally, the United States and Europe are on a Western path. We share far more commonalities than we have differences. We're not engaged in an existential struggle with Germany. That is absolutely not what we're doing. We are allies and partners in the most profound of ways.
Wonderful. Thank you. Minister Vaitchunas?
Yes, just shortly, we know the price of independence, but also we know the price of monopoly. Just was the question about could be the margin. So now we are looking forward. Also, this terminal FSRU is leased till 2024. But now we are looking forward to purchase this terminal, to have the ownership. And for that reason, for additional 20 years for the future. And we calculated the price, what is the price between the scenarios of having LNG and not having LNG. So according to this very sophisticated methodology, but in our case, the price without LNG could be between 11 and 20% higher than with LNG. So this is very clear answer that having LNG, this is really the economic rationale. And talking about the Ukraine and transit, we have just to bring our memories back. I mean that we just can Google the reason why the Nord Stream 2 will be built. So at the very beginning, the statement from the Gazprom was very simple. The reason for the Nord Stream 2 is to stop the transit through Ukraine. This was the fact. And Russians are sometimes really honest persons, and they are saying what they are thinking. Then they realized that this is not a good PR question, so they changed the philosophy, and now this is the saying that the transit question will be solved, the transit should be ensured, and so on and so on. But the key reasoning was to stop the transit to Ukraine, and on this we have to be very honest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dominic, as a last
I try. I mean, maybe I start with the first one with Ukraine. I mean, right now the German government, as Angela Merkel has understood, of course, that there are political dimensions to the project, and right now German government ministers try to sort of forge this compromise that Gazprom will extend transit contract with Ukraine beyond 2019. I don't know how successful that will be in the end, but maybe that's the last instrument to put pressure on Gazprom to sort of avoid that situation that Ukraine is left out of the whole deal in the end. On the other hand, the German government will, and I think also European officials will will put pressure on the Ukrainian government if that happens, that they modernize their sort of gas infrastructure, which is also a topic that has been discussed for a long time, I think. Maybe one thing on the customer pressure. I have the impression that, like in Germany, you have a different discussion on that. Gas from Russia is, I mean, the image of Russia has changed a lot over the last years, but I don't think this is yet that strong that German customers would, that's how I understood your question, that German customers would stand up and say, like, we don't want to get gas from Russia anymore, because it goes like the German-Russian relationship is maybe a different one than Lithuanian-German relationship, or you disagree?
Excuse me. It wasn't an end-use customer that I had in mind.
Okay.
But I had in mind primarily the governments that sooner or later, directly or indirectly, affected. That was my point. I have no illusions about the guy on the street. That wasn't my point. I apologize. I mean customers being the nations, the European countries, who would be sourcing the gas.
But in the end, there could be pressure from bottom-up pressure on the government to change their positions on topics like that.
Well, I can see we have questions on the floor yet. I don't know if you, because we're running out of time. And Minister Naimski also wanted to make a comment here as well.
I just wanted to stress one point. We are talking about transit through Ukraine. This is, of course, very important part of the whole issue, but it seems that it might be treated as a kind of an excuse for investors, I would put it that way, securing minimal volume of transit through Ukraine and saying at this time to the opponents, still opponents, okay, we completed, what would you like to have, so why you are opposing the project further? And this is not the only argument against second Nord Stream. We are talking about other issues. This is about solidarity among European states. And this is probably more important than Ukrainian transit.
On this cheerful note, I have to ask your understanding and support for us. There are many questions, I'm sure, that we would like to discuss, and I'm sure that our speakers will be around so that you can tackle these questions more in an informal way. But I would like to thank you very much in the first place for our wonderful speakers and panelists, because we have seen a big challenge and a fantastic series of suggestions and ideas in which we agree on. What I think has emerged in this discussion is really a series of common points of which almost accounts for an action plan, what to do and what to focus on in the near future to handle the challenge of Nord Stream 2, to continue to focus on the sanctions and the importance of the sanctions, to continue to focus on and prioritize the necessary infrastructure that is needed to develop, the need to focus on the islands of vulnerability, as Sandra said, in the near future, to develop the necessary infrastructure to cope with this challenge, to find the partners and friends in the German decision makers and influencers who will work with us and who will help us make sure that wrong decisions are not taken, to learn the lessons of the worthiness of investment in energy infrastructure, which makes energy prices lower. So I think we have a good action plan laid out for us, and I would like to ask you very much to join me in thanking our speakers for this wonderful panel.